afternoon. We're going to continue our event. Just to put in context, right? The first part yesterday, we went a little bit in the past to see what brought us to the present. This morning, we discussed what has happened in the recent past with the other centers. And then we discussed the Center for Intellectual Freedom. And now we are going to look for the future, okay? So we have two panels and then a capstone panel. Now, the first one is to answer the very important, difficult question, I would say, can universities be reformed? And we have a very distinguished set of speakers here. I'm very proud of being able to bring these gentlemen to Iowa City. Scott Atlas, Hoover Institution at Stanford. I'll not speak very long about you. Definitely not the CV, because it will be the whole session. But Scott Atlas from Hoover Institution at Stanford. Sergiu Klainerman from Princeton University and the National Academy of Science. And Harald Uhlig from the University of Chicago. I just want to hear, so we're going to go through this alphabetical order, and starting with Scott Atlas. I'm so glad that you're here, all three of you. And please let us know, can universities be reformed?
Okay, thank you, Luciano. Muito obrigado. I'm delighted to support this new center, but today the question is different. The question is, can universities be reformed? Several months ago, Jordan Peterson's ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, invited me to address a similar topic, can institutions be reformed, at its annual meeting in London, which was there to discuss how to refresh institutions and the best values of Western heritage, particularly the commitment to freedom. Like today, I asked the audience to first consider why here at this specific moment in history are we even asking how institutions, or specifically universities, can be reformed. After all, for decades, we've been aware that our institutions are failing. Editorialized dishonest journalism, wasteful, corrupt government, universities increasingly unbalanced toward the left, embracing intimidation and forms of censorship. My answer about why today is actually COVID, the pandemic management, the most tragic, most unethical breakdown of leadership of free societies in our lifetimes. COVID was the issue that fully exposed, made it undeniable that there was massive across-the-board institutional failure, including denial of fact and the shocking reality of overt censorship in our country, a country founded on freedom. Yet oddly, the topic was invisible at that week-long ARC conference, unmentioned by dozens of speakers, except me. It was the elephant in the room, just as the failure of and acquiescence to pseudoscientific lockdowns and irrational mandates are missing from all of America's political discussions and discussions on university campuses today. Remember, lockdowns were not caused by the virus. Human beings decided to impose lockdowns, including university campus closures and isolation of college students. Those decisions were made by university leaders on the advice of university experts. And lockdowns were widely instituted. They failed to stop the dying. They failed to stop the spread. That's the factual data. And lockdowns directly inflicted massive damage on students, on young people, beyond obvious learning loss, severe psychological harms, explosion of depression and anxiety disorders, self-harms, suicidal ideation, eating disorders, an obesity crisis, and literally killed millions, especially sinfully the poor. As Hannah Arendt observed in Eichmann in Jerusalem, quote, what has come to light is neither nihilism nor cynicism as one might have expected, but a quite extraordinary confusion over elementary questions of morality. More than massive incompetence by so-called experts, more than a lack of critical thinking, more than a failure of leaders, we saw a failure of society's moral and ethical compass so pervasive that we have now lost trust in most institutions and leaders, trust that is essential to the function of any free, diverse society. Why is this relevant specifically to universities? Because universities and professors are granted privileged positions in our society. Professors are automatically, by virtue of their titles, deemed expert by the public. They are selected as key advisors to government leaders and directors of government agencies. They are the sources for the media of expertise. They are considered leaders. And most importantly, university professors are entrusted to teach critical thinking to our children and serve as role models. Academics and university leaders, falsely clothed by their titles, just as the emperor, were exposed, lacking what it takes to be leaders. University presidents and professors broke the social contract with our most precious resource, our children, harming them directly, failing as role models, and now as a nation, the free exchange of ideas is under threat. And what was the response to truth at the so-called elite universities, including my own, Stanford? Censorship, character assassination, intimidation, and to me, formal faculty senate censure. Although nuanced, it was direct and violated all tenets of academic freedom, being directly commanded by the person who pays my salary, quote, stop writing X, quote, write an apology for X. Colleagues at Hoover told, quote, stop defending Scott. Publicly defamed by other faculty members using their official Stanford titles and emails sent throughout the university, posted on university websites, in opinion pieces in academic journals and newspapers and social media, and of course, marginalization of myself, speaking no longer at institutional events. Why is censorship used by universities or others? To shut someone up, yes, but more importantly, to deceive the public, to stop others from hearing, to convince a naive public, including the student body, that there's some sort of consensus. But truth is not a team sport. Truth is not determined by consensus or by numbers of people who agree or by titles. It's discovered by debate, proven by critical analysis. Arguments are won by data, by logic, not by personal attack. And here's the point. Aren't America's universities supposed to be the centers for the free exchange of ideas? As a physician and professor at top universities for 30 years, as a graduate of the University of Chicago School of Medicine, when facts mattered, I fear for students. Students cannot possibly learn critical thinking without hearing different views, especially ideas they may not agree with. And critical thinking is the most important lesson to learn in college. So why is my answer no to can universities be reformed? Point one. Too many university leadership positions are filled by people who shrink during emergencies and controversy. That's the true test of leadership and character, rather than standing up for what's right when it counts most. Despite the known minuscule risk to students from COVID and the disastrous harms unfolding in college kids by spring 2020, including from lockdowns that 1 in 4 contemplated suicide from the isolation, that 99% of colleges and universities shut down in-person classes and shifted down online, that 95% forced masks, rigid mandatory testing, quarantining, isolating students who had a positive test for 10 to 14 days, and more than 1,000 universities and colleges even forced injection of an experimental drug with known side effects for disease that presented minuscule risks to students. That is not leadership. For example, a second example, the Stanford Faculty Senate issued a formal censure, as I mentioned, of me. To me alone, by the way, not to the other 2 Stanford professors who said exactly what I did. And at that meeting of the Faculty Senate, the president, the provost, and the director of Hoover not only failed to stand up for academic freedom, but actively came down on the side of censure. And 3 years later, after it was widely understood that I was 100% correct in standing against lockdowns, by the way, there was a new meeting of the Faculty Senate at the behest of other faculty members and the widely respected former provost, John Etchemendy. They called for a reversal of that censure, giving the people a second chance to show leadership. Yet, both the new president, John Levin, and the director of Hoover said nothing. Point 2, although perhaps well-intentioned, university statements claiming a commitment to academic freedom are meaningless. We know that. That's proven. People must be judged by actions, not what they believe. Isn't that what we teach our children? Stanford has a statement. It's 50 years old. You don't need a new one. It says, quote, suppression of the widest range of viewpoints should be encouraged, free from institutional orthodoxy and from internal or external coercion, unquote. The value of an electronic document is worth the paper it's written on. Here's the reality. While virtually all university presidents claim to stand strong for free speech and open inquiry, let's look at this year's FIRE ranking of college free speech and campus deplatforming database. Self-censorship by conservative students is rampant today. Tolerance for controversial speakers is low. Disruption of conservative speakers, specifically conservative speakers, goes unpunished. Today, the Ivies plus Stanford schools average 220th out of 251 in free speech rankings, 81% deplatform speakers, 51% of students self-censor, 71% are okay with shout-downs of speakers, double conservatives than liberals. Point 3, even worse, top universities today are directly creating what they call, quote, better tools to censor what they call, quote, misinformation and disinformation. Several universities worldwide, especially mine, Stanford, who converted their notorious Internet Observatory censorship enterprise into a more acceptable Stanford cybersecurity project, are actively researching and developing AI-based tools to detect and mitigate misinformation. Somehow they are the arbiter of truth. These are the metrics on grant funding today. 25 major universities are involved in this disinformation funding. 70% of higher ed institutions today integrate AI into teaching students how to, quote, detect disinformation. Funding today targeting their disinformation over $200 million in 2024-25 grants from government, philanthropy, academic seed funds. Point 4, even in the face of murder to stop free speech, elite university leaders cowered. They did not learn any lessons. They compounded their moral failure by uniformly ignoring Charlie Kirk's 2025 assassination, a direct murder to stop free speech. Not a single top 20 school offered any mental health support to students, despite its on-campus setting and obvious impact on students, standing in stunning contrast to their widespread offerings of mental health and wellness support, quote unquote, in the past for their left-favored crises, George Floyd's death, and yes, both of President Trump's elections were considered crises. No doubt new versions of institutions need to emerge and old versions need to reemerge. And I and many others here are working on initiatives and policies to do just that, to ensure the free exchange of ideas, the basis for the mission of education. But most solutions, in my opinion, come from individuals. Ultimately, individuals, not institutions, will save freedom. I fear we have a disastrous void in individual courage in America. For instance, I'm proud to be an outlier, happily proven right when the inliers, as I call them, were so wrong. But cancel culture, even without violence, is highly effective. It stops most people from speaking. I received hundreds of emails from professors, doctors, and scientists all over the country in the 3.5 months that I was in the White House, including from Stanford, including from inside the NIH, saying, keep talking, Scott. You're 100% right, but, quote, we're afraid for our families and our jobs. We cannot speak. Why did free people, by the way, accept these draconian, illogical lockdowns? Censorship and propaganda are certainly part of the reason, but that alone does not explain today's silence. I'm concerned that even the people demanding institutional change are also eager to turn the page on the human rights violations, the true constitutional crisis that, by the way, proved there are no guaranteed freedoms in this country if they can be reversed on declaration of emergency. Why do they want to turn the page? Because so many of them, so many smart, influential people were complicit. They advocated the irrational members. They acquiesced to it. They said nothing. And that acquiescence, which is cowardice, and the failure to grasp reality are inconvenient truths that they do not want to revisit. But apology for the destruction, admission of failure, and accountability are what we need to restore trust in institutions and among fellow citizens. To quote C.S. Lewis, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but it's the form of every virtue at the testing point. We can't have a peaceful, free society if it is filled with people who lack the courage to speak and act with certainty on Hannah Arendt's elementary questions of morality. Finally, to the students, if there are some in this room, I like to say never forget what G.K. Chesterton said. Right is right, even if nobody does it. Wrong is wrong, even if everybody is wrong about it. Thank you.
Sergiu.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, and despite the fact that, as you will see from my presentation, I'm somewhat skeptical. I mean, I do understand that things are extremely difficult. It's still not working? Yeah, okay. So that the obstacles that I'm going to talk about are really huge. I'm extremely supportive of the initiative here. So with this, let me start by making a personal anecdote, talk about a personal anecdote. So I'm a mathematician, so in principle, if you do mathematics, you are not involved at all with all the terrible things that are happening in humanities or social sciences or medicine or but I also happen to be from Romania, so I grew up in Romania at the time of communism, and of course, terrible regime and terrible memories that I have from it. In particular, there was nothing even remotely comparable with freedom that you can talk about. So when I came to the States, I was absolutely convinced that these sort of things that I saw in Romania are impossible in the United States. The United States has this great tradition of freedom, freedom of speech, academic freedom, whatever that means. That's another thing that maybe we should talk about it. What does academic freedom really means? But in any case, the sense that people can engage in discussions, free discussions, and nobody should be worried, I thought, expressing opinions which are not popular. And of course, I was completely wrong, and it took me some time to realize, and partly because I was just writing mathematical papers. The first time when I wrote something which was not mathematical was actually connected with Joshua Katz. The first article that I wrote was the fact that I was concerned about what happened to him. And then little by little, I got involved, and I thought that the least that I can do is to express my opinions. In any case, this being said, let me go to the obstacles. So what are the obstacles? I mean, the question is, can university be reformed? First thing you need to do is to understand what are the obstacles for reform, and then see if the obstacles can be overcome. So first of all, I think that universities lack autonomy, meaning that due to state and federal mandates, misinterpreted civil rights legislation, certification, large infusion of money through grants and donations, universities don't have that much independence to pursue different paths, for example. So yesterday I mentioned this paradox that in a country which is really a capitalist country based on private initiative and competition, you have essentially all universities, with very few exceptions, following the same pattern. And the only explanation I have is exactly this lack of independence. I mean, there is too much, there are too many global constraints. These constraints really, to a large extent, are enforced by federal government. We have now a different administration. We'll see if how much they can change. Apparently, the federal government has a lot of power to change the environment in university. So I'm hopeful that maybe things will change with administrations which have different different visions of what education is. So this is, I think, a huge obstacle because the constraints are global. That's one thing that I realized as a student in Romania is that the difference to me, the difference between capitalism and Marxism and communism was that communism was based on global laws and capitalism was based on local laws. And in that sense, it's not too different from what happens in physics. Physics is based on local laws. The fundamental laws are local, the consequences are global. And whenever you try to impose constraints, global constraints, like Marxism or communism, things go badly. Anyway, so that's my first obstacle is this one, lack of autonomy of universities and these global constraints that are very, very hard to really have an impact on them. The second thing is the belief system of the elites. So this is the dominance among elites of a belief system centered on hardcore materialism and its ideological derivatives, which are Marxist, neo-Marxist, deconstructionist, anti-colonialist, critical theory. And these were very well described by Zach and Ivan yesterday. What started in the Enlightenment as an affirmation of belief in reason has transmogrified into a mishmash of cookish beliefs sold to the public in the name of social justice. And this brings to mind this wonderful symphony by Berlioz, which is called Symphonie Fantastique, which starts from a beautiful theme, right, which is the rationalism and the idea that we can create a society purely based on reason, and that somehow transmogrified into in the case of Berlioz, in the case of Symphonie Fantastique, into this witches' Shabbos, right? So the theme, the main theme, which is idée fixe, really gets completely distorted by the end of the symphony. Here is another thing. The left has an enormous advantage in its debate with conservative ideas. Those ideas, in the case of conservatives, are usually based on the Americans' founding principle. Not usually, I mean, it's almost always based on the Americans' founding principles, such as individual civil liberties, limited government, the rule of law. Conservatives who have a visceral understanding of the inherent conflict between the basic human aspirations for freedom, justice and equality, personal security, self-expressive spirituality, or the rights of the individual versus societal cohesion, are in the very difficult position of having to find the right balance between them, which appear inevitable as uninspiring compromises. So this, I think, is very serious. I mean, conservatives really have a very good understanding of the conflict between freedom and equality, for example. So this leaves them vulnerable to attacks from the left, who is or pretends to be intolerant to any societal imperfection. The left vehemently insists that this or that form of inequality is unacceptable and never bothers to explain how its vision of more equality is not incompatible with freedom, or how extensive individual freedoms for some do not interfere with the freedom or personal safety of others. American conservatives are thus perpetually on the defensive, in the difficult position to explain complex abstract ideas of separations of power, restraint, government, personal responsibility, and so on and so forth, when the left insists that this conflict with they really insist on the conflict with a specific suffering of concrete groups of human beings. So they constantly appeal very effectively to emotions, and it bases its strategy on being constantly on the offensive. So that, I think, it's a very serious obstacle, and I mean, obviously we are trying to fight it, but it's not going to be easy. As everybody but Eisgruber, that's the president of my university, believes, the terrorist of modern university is no longer in the search for truth, wherever it leads, through the promotion of excellence and individual merit. It is instead something else altogether, a tenuous compromise between the old tellers and pursuit of social justice through the mantra of DEI. DEI, of course, is premised on the belief that every visible disparity between groups defined by race, sex, ethnicity, etc., detrimental to those viewed as historically marginalized, has its origins in discrimination. Discrimination redefines us in terms of, it has to be, therefore, it's defined in terms of implicit bias, which is an invisible structural form of bigotry that is suddenly everywhere, according to the left. Like witchcraft, this form of prejudice cannot be directly measured, but it manifests itself, according to them, through its harmful results. As Inquisition was once needed to fight witchcraft and other ideological deviances, the immense DI bureaucracies of modern university had to be created to combat this terrible disease. People, of course, are selected less and less on academic credential and more on thinly disguised quotas. Entire new programs, so here is another major obstacle in my opinion, entire new programs and departments were created, so these are the grievance studies mostly, whose most obvious mission appears to be that of advancing the ideology of DEI and creating its future elite cadres. This to me sounds very similar to what happened in Romania. There were special schools which were meant for education of the future elite of the party. So something similar I see happens here. Once you, I mean, it's pretty clear that once you have created enough woke tenured faculty and legions of woke administrators, it becomes close to impossible to reverse a trend. And of course, many of these people in, I mean, if you look at many of the administrators are actually recruited from this, I don't know, grievance studies or other work faculty. So here's another thing which I believe it's important to think about. There is this, what I call the work-producing feedback mechanism. So this goes like this. The elite university educate those who would later have an immeasurable impact back to the universities themselves through legislation, legal mandates, control of the certification process, grants by foundations, personal donations, or as work educators of the next generation of, work educators of the next generation of students through schools, elementary schools. This, in my opinion, provides the best expression of why the woke disease is spreading so fast, not only in the university, but in all important US institutions. So, I mean, you just have to think about the fact that politicians and presidents of universities sometimes, of various institutions, I mean, usually don't come from STEM. There are very few people in STEM disciplines who really are recruited in this kind of leadership positions. And as a consequence, those who are recruited are usually from humanities, maybe social sciences, which are obviously much more infected of the woke disease than the sciences. So even though I do believe that the sciences are in a relatively good position, I mean, America is still dominant in almost all sciences, though you can certainly see a decline, and many people have talked about it. So I still believe that the sciences are in relatively good shape. But again, this is not comfort to me, because I do believe that what happens in humanities, social sciences is much more important, exactly from the point of view of selecting the next leaders of the country. Another thing that I believe it's a serious obstacle is that the unreasonable expansion of the university system. I mean, we all know that maybe at this point, 39% of young adults between ages of 18 and 24 are enrolled into college. This was in 2022. Something like 62% of recent high graduates went straight to college that year. This obviously leads to lower standards from the universities.
And of course, I mean, the last few years has seen an incredible decrease in standards everywhere. I can go on. The terrible state of the elementary educational system, I mean, you cannot separate the situation in the elementary educational system from the higher education, because obviously our students are educated in schools, and the schools are in terrible shape because roughly because of the terrible shape of schools of educations, and maybe also because of the educational unions. There is maybe there is something good that might come out of it. There's going to be a coming crunch, I think, of universities. I mean, universities cannot keep expanding. The students who are worse and worse educated will have fewer and fewer job prospects. And so that probably will create a dynamics which might be used for reform, but it's not going to be easy. Another obstacle yet, in my opinion, is a tenure system which makes it impossible to fire cooks and incompetents. Contrary to the common opinion, I believe that tenure incentivizes people to play safe. I mean, the idea was that you need tenure for people to take risks. That's just not the case. I mean, I've seen very little evidence of it. I see, on the contrary, I see that people play it safe and pursue low-risk directions, which they believe will get them tenure. And once they have tenure, most of them continue by inertia or in expectations of promotions to play safe, to keep playing safe. So I think I gave a lot of obstacles. Do I have a vision of possible reform? My short answer is a qualified yes. It is possible despite all these formidable obstacles. But the key to success, to use a term much loved by the left, is a whole society approach. Right? So this is because you cannot really point out what is a particular problem. Right? There are so many problems. The problems are global, and you need a whole society approach. Back to, so do I still have some time? Or? Back to the main theme of this article, can university be reformed? As I said, I'm roughly a pessimist. But things can happen. So I don't believe in internal reforms. I think internal reforms, when you have an imbalance of 20-1 in some places, makes it almost impossible. So people talk about all sorts of things. I doubt that they are useful. They're just dressing. It's not going to lead to much. But external factors are, of course, extremely important. And I mean, to use a cruise analogy, at the end of the Second World War, there was a denazification process of West Germany, which created a new Germany which has completely different belief systems than the one they had during Nazi Germany. But I'm not so sure that such a thing is possible here. Obviously, it's a completely different situation. Anyway, I have a list of things that could be done, but I presume that most of these things will be discussed in the next session, so maybe I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Harald Uhlig. I'm very pleased and honored to be on this panel and at this wonderful event. I think it's fantastic that the University of Iowa is creating the center So I'm on a panel, asking the question, can universities be reformed? And I'm going to give you a very nuanced and balanced answer that I hope is not too difficult to remember. So that's my answer. I think it's a no. And I'm going to spend a bit more time to explain how I come to that answer, and things that one might think about doing. I'm encouraging these things to be done, but while I'm skeptical that they will be very effective, and then where might hope come from? All right. So the first question is, should universities be reformed? Are universities in need of reform? And different people look at this in different ways. It's like one of these ambiguous pictures here, where some people see a rabbit and other people see a duck. There's a view from the right that the universities have been taken over by the radical left, and that's what we are largely hearing in these days. A statement that expresses this by Vice President J.D. Vance, who said in 2021, the universities do not pursue knowledge and truth, they pursue deceit and lies. The professors are the enemy. And of course, there wasn't, you could just wait for the reaction. So there's a view from the left where, and you're hearing this a lot, being on campuses, hearing this maybe twice a week, twice a day. And, it's assumed that that's, what everybody believes in. And, the universities are under threat from an authoritarian president. We are in a crucial moment that will decide the future of higher education. We can't allow fascists to strip it away. Now is the time to fight. So that's Todd Wolfson, who said this in August 24. Now maybe while I'm a professor, by virtue of being on this panel, you might guess on which side of the view I'm here. And I think the view from the left is more a symptom of what has gone wrong rather than something that we should take all that seriously. In particular, universities heavily lean far left. So the diagram on the left explains the blue pro-Democrat was the red pro-Republican split across many fields. And this is based on a study from Mike Langbert in I forgot the exact date, but a few years ago. And so there are many fields, where you can't find a single Republican. And even in economics, my field is overwhelmingly left. That's the second bar from the bottom, if you can read it. Now, I'm not talking about, some people preferring Barack Obama over Mitt Romney. That's not the issue that we are talking about. You're talking about a far left takeover, and embedded, supported by many people who espouse views of the type that we've just read on the previous slide. And the expression of that is, examples on the right. Okay, these are student protests, but these guys were cheered on by many on the faculty. Welcome to the People's University. And of course, there's a People's Republic in a large country to the east, and I guess that's what they're referring to. And it's not the future I want to be living in. All right, so here are three things I think you might be legitimately thinking about as getting at a reform. And I think they're all worth doing, and people that are in charge of doing them, I cheer them on, and I hope they get done. So first thing might be to impose on all universities that accept federal money to adopt the Chicago trifecta, or at least something very similar to that. Some universities have adopted some things that are very close. And in particular, the Chicago principles are often thought of as endorsing free speech, and they are, but I think the more important document in all of this may be the Calvin Report. The Calvin Report was a report written in 1967, and it states famously, the university is the home and sponsor of critics. It's not itself the critic. That is, universities should try their darndest to remain politically neutral and not comment on any political issue of the day, and just hold back and not say anything. That's really what they should be doing, so that faculty are free to say what they want to say and not feel like they're occasionally contradicting whatever the university president might have stated as a marching order for the day. The problem, of course, as Scott already said, the implementation really is key, right? You may agree to these principles, but if the faculty at large doesn't believe it, then it's not going to make much of a change. I was on the council of the Senate at the University of Chicago, and when I got there, I talked to the person leading it, and I said, maybe we should have voted in the council reaffirming the Calvin report. And he looked at me and with his sorry look, and he said, what do you think will happen? When at that point I said, yeah, better not, right? I mean, let's be happy that the report is there. All right, so the second course of action is to provide Western civilization in liberal arts courses. Allow me to cite Robert George, who has a Wall Street Journal op-ed, a few days ago, rigorous liberal arts education that refuses to engage in indoctrination. Sounds great, but of course you have to have the right people, to do this. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but the problem is, it's not the students that are far left; it's the faculty that's far left. And you can't task wolves with saving the sheep. That's just, it's just, you have to get if you get a few people on board that can do this well, I'm all in favor. But don't trust the existing faculty to do this on their own. And the final point, of course, is to appoint conservative leadership. I think many people have argued that that's what we should be doing. And it is a good step in the right direction. Conservative university leaders can abolish DEI. They can maybe shut down certain programs that lean particularly left. They can interfere with certain appointments. But but you have a faculty that's resisting. Any university leader that comes in also has to get along with the faculty and engage in diplomacy. Otherwise, nothing will go. The faculty is very proud. They're liking to make their own decision. Faculty governance, is writ large at any university. What's that university president going to do? Maybe demand, insist on hiring conservative faculty, expand on DEI by having yet another protected category? By God, no. That's the exact opposite direction of what we should be doing at universities. I don't think we should have, quota for conservatives. I think that would be the wrong direction. Now, where are rays of hope? Well, first, students are not stupid. It's important to recognize, right? We can try to indoctrinate them as much as we want, but they think on their own. So there's this quote by George Bernard Shaw: if at age 20 you're not a communist, then you have no heart. If at age 30 you're not a capitalist, then you have no brains. And I think we're seeing this a lot when the students that may have been part of these Columbia and Harvard protests eventually, go on to nice jobs and banks and what have you. They shed that fur, if you like, from those college days. So here's maybe a provocative conclusion. Let the faculty radicals go all out. Teach your class on Marxist stance or whatever was mentioned in the morning. They will be so much easier to spot. And the students will go there, be amused, and maybe replicate all the views by the professor on the exam. That's fine. But are we really thinking that they're going to take that lesson for life? I don't know how much should we rein them in is a serious question. Second point is the AI revolution will sweep work degrees away. There are many degrees, right? The grievance studies degrees and so forth. What are these people doing afterwards? And maybe we just replace them by asking, Gemini 3 to write those texts, and then we don't need these degrees anymore. And if we don't need these degrees anymore, those students will then result ultimately by the mechanisms in any university to reduce these faculties until they're gone. And then finally, the counter-reaction has grown in strength. So, we're seeing this all over the country, and we're now seeing this in Iowa. The conclusion: let the Iowa Center for Intellectual Freedom grow and prosper. So, summary: can universities be reformed? I said the answer is no, but this might be fine. Salvation might be elsewhere. And I asked Gemini 3 for a summary of my talk just in case, and this is what Gemini 3 came up with. Professor Uhlig, quite blunt and well-read, said reform for the college is dead. The faculty's left lean makes the outlook quite lean, but the Iowa Center will save us instead.
You know, when you prepare an event like this, you have to think about who will put in the panels. And of course, you cannot determine what they will say, but more or less you kind of try to predict and to see how they will go, right? And I wanted for this panel to get a balance of different views. So I predicted correctly that Scott Atlas would say no. I predicted correctly that Sergio would say maybe, but I was totally wrong about Harald. So now, the audience, now you get 2 no's and 1 maybe. I think this is a lesson to all of us how difficult the task in front of us is, right? These are very distinguished professors, long career, very qualified, and they have experience and they know what they're talking about. I want at least you to get to the heart. Look, the task in front of us is not simple, okay? And of course, I don't want to say much other than thank you, all of you. And I'm going to open to the panels because I have some questions, but I think that most of you will have a lot of questions. However, I forgot to obey order that I received. So I'm going to follow the order, which is to read the following. Thank you for attending today's event and for your commitment for free expression and exchange of ideas. This event is open to the public for observation. However, the panel discussions are limited to the invited participants and guests of the summit. We ask that all in attendance are respectful of our panelists and invited guests, and we ask that you adhere to the University of Iowa policies that prohibit disruption in the university's facilities. Thank you. So, anyone wants to comment? Question? Actually, I have a, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. And gentlemen, thank you for a really, really thought-provoking set of presentations. The question that I have for you, though, is that all of you spoke from your positions at elite universities. And in fact, you, Professor Uhlig, cited statistics from elite universities. You mentioned top 20 universities. But I dare say that the faculty, and especially the students that are enrolled at Stanford, Chicago, and Princeton are somewhat different than I'm seeing at my current institution, Iowa State, or at my previous institution, which was a regional public in the South. So the question that I have for you is how generalizable are the conclusions that you draw when you start with a point that's, a point of reference that is not representative of the myriad institutions we have in the United States? Thank you.
Well, okay, I can say one thing. It's not a complete answer to your question, but if you look at FIRE, they have this survey on how universities do relative to freedom of speech or academic freedom rather. And I find it interesting that actually all the elite universities are in terrible shape. I mean, they are, I don't know, starting with the position 170 maybe. The best is at 170. I don't know, University of Chicago used to be the best, but now you are, I don't know, 12 or 13 or something like that. So it's not, University of Chicago is one of the exceptions, but the universities outside the elite university are doing much better. So that's interesting. I don't quite understand why, but it's a fact.
Yeah, so I mean, the University of Chicago is special, I should say. First of all, the survey here that I mentioned, that's a survey across many universities. This is not the University of Chicago, on the left, right? I mean, and the picture on the right is, I believe, Columbia University, so that's also not the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago has these three principles. So I think, I mean, the system is broken, right? I mean, that was the Humpty Dumpty picture, right? And the second law of thermodynamics, which is complicated, but to economists like me, the version of this, if it's broken, it's hard to put it back together again. And I think we're in that situation, and I think it's true everywhere, but at least the University of Chicago within that range is probably doing pretty much as well as can be. And we have these principles. Do they have full support by the faculty? Maybe not, right? I mean, there's that, but I think at least, right, we have that, and it moves us forward, and it creates a reasonably good situation by comparison. And we see this also among our students. So there is a student newspaper at the University of Chicago called the Chicago Thinker. Wonderful people. These are students that publish, I would say, conservative-leaning paper, but really free-thinking paper, right? They think on their own, they say what they want, and I think that's just absolutely terrific. And I think it's possible because the university, by its three principles, cannot possibly crack down on them, so there's even no attempt of doing this. But nonetheless, you constantly have to work. I'm a part of a group that has been spoken to the president repeatedly. These principles are important. They need to be maintained and so forth. So I don't know the situation at your particular university, how it looks like, starting adopting the Chicago principles and the Chicago trifecta might be a start.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think there's an important distinction here. We're not talking, at least I'm not talking about the students. I'm talking about the university, the faculty, the leadership. The students, I think, are pretty similar in my experience. By the way, I'm a Fighting Illini, so I don't like University of Iowa Hawkeyes. But the students, and I'm an advisor to the Chicago Thinker, and every school has a paper like that. Stanford has something called the Stanford Review. There are great students at all the colleges and all the universities. And I do think, in terms of being somewhat optimistic, without having the data, my impression is that the people in college now are more open to ideas. They're more open to conservative thought, which means, by definition, different from the faculty. To cite a number here, Stanford has its own postal code, so you can look up the voting. In the 2020 election, 95% Biden, 3% Trump, whereas California was 1/3 Trump, 2/3 Biden. So it's an outlier, the university community, but the students are not. And I'm pretty optimistic that, and I know from the Stanford Review writers, by the way, there's a rush towards students at Stanford wanting to write for the conservative or the alternative newspaper. So, but the surveys, and I'm the one that quoted the fire data in my remarks, it's uniform what's going on in the university system. Okay, there are certain universities that are worse than others, but I'm not convinced that the faculty are really very different, and the leadership is anything but weak at all the universities.
So I'll give to the gentleman, but I want to ask one thing. Scott Atlas revealed a little bit of his experience with the persecution in the university. And this kind of thing that happened to him is one of the reasons why we have self-censorship that we were talking about yesterday. And we had all the professors here, another one's Joshua Katz, but also have Harald here. And Harald, I would like you to report a little bit about your experience and how you suffered from the persecution about your views. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So this was in 2020, after George Floyd was killed, and there were all these protests, and there was the view by very popular at the time by Black Lives Matter to defund the police. And so I sent out a tweet making fun of the thought. I mean, we need police. I mean, so I sent out a tweet saying, that that's really unfortunate that the cause for George Floyd has been taken over by flat earthers. So I compare them to flat earthers. Black Lives Matter, I compare them to flat earthers. So, let's just say there were some people that weren't pleased by that tweet. And so colleagues at various universities started a petition. I was lead editor at the time of the Journal of Political Economy, to have me removed from the Journal of Political Economy. And so that petition gathered, 700 signatures, some of them co-authors of mine, which I found particularly bizarre. Anyways, as far as I'm concerned, that's an act of free speech. People can say I should be removed from the editorship of the Journal of Political Economy. They can also say the Earth is flat. I mean, this is a free country. You can say these things. So I didn't have anything per se against the people doing that. The problem was really, I should maybe reflect on that inside the university, where then we're coming back to your point about weak administrators. I mean, they did remove me temporarily from my position as lead editor for the Journal of Political Economy. And the pretext was a different one, which had to deal with something that happened in a graduate class a couple of years earlier. I mean, it's anyways. There was a so they pinned it on something else, but because they couldn't pin it on this statement that I tweeted out. And there was a particular student involved, a black student. I guess he could have complained about it, probably didn't. Chose not to, so then the university had to cave in, or the people doing this had to cave in, had to reinstate me as editor of the Journal of Political Economy. And I should say I was saved at that point by the university neutrality statement. I think if it had not been there, the university would have, or the people that were doing this would have had an easy time of removing me from my position. So that's a short version of it. So I'm saying not all is well, but having the Chicago trifecta in place, provide some safeguards in a situation like that.
But if I may say, it was not the trifecta that helped you, but rather the fact that you had a good president at the time. Right?
That's true.
Because, I mean, that's my point. I mean, you can have the trifecta. Trifecta is wonderful. But if it's not supported by the faculty and by the administration, it's meaningless. Right?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated because President Zimmer at the time was very sick, so he wasn't actually very involved anymore with running the university. We had a provost then running the university. But it was, it would have meant crossing a threshold that was, considered reasonably sacrosanct. It would have been, a change in policy, and there was a, more, there was a bolder step than the provost was willing to do at the time. That's my interpretation. But I can't, I shouldn't ascribe motives to people. That was my reading of the situation.
Needless to say, I'm extremely supportive of the trifecta. I even wrote articles and so on and so forth. But I'm becoming more and more skeptical that this would solve the problem. That's all. I mean.
I just want to add one comment. The Journal of Political Economy that Harald was mentioning is one of the top journals in economics. You cannot go above it. You can go sideways, but it's one of the best. So we have questions here. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much. So first off, really appreciate all of your views, as was articulated by the last person who asked a question. And so I was really pleased to hear an emphasis on data, because I think part of what we were discussing in the morning was how does one define the problem that one's trying to solve? Because there's several different problems that have been described, whether it has to do with student self-censorship, whether there's a concern about confirmation bias among certain disciplines, not all of them, whether it's simply a matter of political representation, which, as several of you pointed out, leads to problems about, does that just mean we create another form of DEI, which I take it you're not in favor of. So I really do appreciate the interest in drilling down on data, and I agree that FIRE is a good source for that. The nuance that I would ask you to consider and comment on, if you'd like to, is that the most recent report that FIRE has released in 2025, which I thought was excellent, they are starting to distinguish between the nature of the threats against intellectual freedom. And what was so interesting to me is that they reported on the last 5 years, so from 2020 onward. And for 2020 through 2022, they reported that most of that I also appreciate that they report on, they really try to be balanced. So they talk about threats from, quote, the right and threats from, quote, the left. From 2020 to 2022, conservative students were the ones reporting most infringements, right? And that's consistent with what I think we've heard today. And then from 2023 to the present, actually, the infringements are coming primarily against students who identify as being on the left. The other thing that was interesting was that the infringements that are coming against students who identify as being on the right, they are saying that they're coming from their peers. They're not coming from the state, they're not coming from administrators, they're actually coming from their peers, and that is what is fueling the self-censorship, is they're afraid of being shunned, which I think is really real, especially when you're a young person, right? You don't want to have no one to sit with in the lunchroom. I mean, that's terrible. Versus from 2023 onward, where we see that actually students who identify being on the left are experiencing state-driven infringements on the right to intellectual freedom. And so as this is a state university, and this is a state-funded center with an incredibly honorable goal of promoting intellectual freedom, I just am curious how you think about those fairly different types of threats to intellectual freedom, one being among peers, among students, and the others being very top-down, state-driven. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to make a couple of comments. One is the behavior among students to each other was modeled by the professors. And this is the real sin. I find myself saying sin very frequently these days, but that was really the biggest problem in a sort of a emotional sense that I had with what was going on campuses over the past 5 years, and more, really over the past decade at least, is that they have modeled behavior that is not what a role model should be modeling toward their fellow faculty members, this vitriol, this vitriol against political opponents, all this stuff. And I think that's a huge problem because professors, whether we like it or not, are role models. We have probably all raised our children to respect their professors. So that statistic on the students being treated poorly and being self-censoring because of the way they're being treated by students, it doesn't surprise me, but the cause is, in my view, what they've seen on campus. The second thing, you're talking about the FIRE data from 2025 data. Yes, it, quote, goes both ways with speakers facing opposition and shouting down, but it's double for conservative speakers. According to the FIRE data, 57 to 72%. Various schools, conservative speaker, opposition shouting down, 29 to 43% liberal. I mean, that's the data from the 2025 FIRE. So now the third point is that yes, it's terrible that when you're subjected to state regulation or any regulation, that if what you're saying is correct, is anti a position, anti a personal opinion, that's completely wrong. No matter which way it goes. I mean, that should be obvious. Again, we need to elect good people into these offices. That's the only solution, which is, I've been reading a lot of Dostoevsky lately, who explained a lot about human nature, and I'm not very optimistic. But, this kind of, the role of the legislature, the role is to ensure the openness, not to clamp down on the, I mean, I'm not running for office, so it's easy for me to say, but that's the answer, and it's very bad if the balancing, it's like Harold's point about hiring a certain number of conservative faculty. That's not the right solution, just like clamping down on leftist speech is not the solution. The solution is more information. That's the only solution to mis and disinformation, too.
Well, I must say I agree, of course, but I have to put a bit into question what you said, or what FIRE said, that between 2023 and 2025. In 2023 and 2024, we had these incredible demonstrations, the pro-Hamas demonstrations in almost all universities. So that's why I find it a bit astonishing what you are saying. I don't know how to explain it.
I mean, since you have two issues you raised, I mean, the clamping down on, views from the top. No, I mean that should be disallowed. I mean that's the essence, right, of this Calvin report, that the university should be politically neutral. They should they should do the darnest of taking a stance. But then, of course, you have this, you have these, conflicts between classmates, and we certainly all understand that. And, maybe the fact that also some of the left now feel it could be a good thing for the following reason. I talked to one of the participants who traveled here, and he said his colleagues, when he told them that he's traveling here, to an organization that will promote intellectual freedom, he said, "Oh, that's a right-wing organization." Right? And, it used to be the case that intellectual freedom, was obviously part of any university. It was a basis on which we would proceed. And so, and so the center should just defend intellectual freedom, period, right? And it's not just a threat to the right, it's also a threat to the left. But we shouldn't change that mission for it to become something else, where you say, oh, we defend intellectual freedom, but by that we really mean everybody has to learn Marxist dance. I mean, that would be the end.
Yes. First of all, most of my heroes are no longer living, only a few are. And I just want to say that Professor Scott Atlas is one of my personal heroes, and I'm delighted I had a chance to be able to say that to you face to face. But you did imply, and I think we all understand why the neo-Marxists, I guess for lack of deconstructionists, the opponents of Western civilizations and American institutions want to embed themselves into academia. But you kind of implied that your feeling about the basically monolithic response among the academia with regard to the COVID was the desire to be able to assert and reinforce their ability to eradicate all individual freedom under the guise of emergency. Were you intending to assert that as the reason why you think there was that monolithic response?
No, I was saying that I was just simply making the point that there is no logical point. There is no such thing as guaranteed freedom if it can be eradicated by calling something an emergency. That I'm just making the overall point that is, to me, I don't know how that's even argued against. There's no such thing as a guaranteed freedom if it's gone when people decide it's gone. So that's all. I was not saying that is the motive, although I do think a lot of people are motivated by wanting to control other people. I'm sort of more of a libertarianish type personality. I don't want to be controlled. I'm a little brother. I had enough of that.
So I came here expecting a dose of optimism at the opening of this new center. I have to say I was a little disappointed. If I understand the comments being pessimistic, I understand the reasons for that. So then what's the solution? What is the solution? Do you think something like the University of Austin, something new, is the solution? Is the solution no universities at all?
Okay, I'm going to take a quick stab. I won't dominate, but I just want to say, I was just answering the questions, can universities be reformed? I am optimistic, sort of, about the country being able to recover and fix things, because the young people that I see, that's the solution. Okay, and I think a lot of people here are working with organizations or initiatives, including this one, that address the young people. It's not going to come from the university, though. It could come from the young people that come and work with your center. The University of Austin, okay, I mean, I'm for everything that try. I think there's a multifactorial thing we have to do here if you want to fix the country, and it's going to depend on individuals. And I think the young people, everyone has strident opinions, but young people are open to listening. And I think through things that I do with my colleague Josh, I was going to be up here at Hoover. We have a program for free exchange of ideas for students. I'm working with something called Global Liberty Institute, and other people have many other initiatives. My personal opinion is you got to focus on people, that are young and that are bold, and empower them, mentor them, network them, and make sure they're the next leaders.
Yeah, no, so I completely agree. We were talking about universities, whether universities as institutions can be reformed. And I think we all agree. I said that it's probably going to be extremely hard, and the others were kind of negative. But I also agree that a global effort which it takes many things, including new universities or these institutions are also very helpful. I think that though they obviously have lots of obstacles, and the change of the educational system as a whole, maybe that can be done. A lot depends on the politics of the country, who is in power. So it's possible, but I don't think it's going to come from within universities. It has to be something that legislatures are involved, and the state legislatures and the federal legislature, and so on and so forth.
I mean, I gave a very stark answer, right? But I'm probably more nuanced in my own beliefs at the end of the day. And again, I cheer these three things on. I mean, I think these are good things to do. They're going in the right direction. They move the needle. I'm not saying they're irrelevant. And we have already made considerable progress. DEI has been pushed back quite a bit, right? So that's a success. And I see what the Trump administration is doing, and I think that's a success, right? And it's moving things forward. But I guess the skepticism is more. It's not going to be easy overnight, and then I don't know, come next year, suddenly it's all fantastic. It won't be. This is a long process. I mean, you have to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and it's just not easy. And point one is exactly what Scott and what Sergio emphasized. The students, we should look to them, and there are so many developments happening that I think, eventually the problem will, to a large degree, also melt away. I mean, that's my hope for other reasons than having to do with university reform.
The main hope is that the country is still very diverse, unlike Europe, for example, which seems to, things like this are become harder and harder. It's a diverse country, so things can happen. If they don't happen in my university at Princeton, they could happen here in Iowa. Something interesting will happen, then somebody else will try to copy and be inspired, and so on. So in that sense, I'm still very optimistic about the United States.
So guys, we already passed the time. I just want to say something to try to answer your question, Nick. And it's kind of something that I already said, right? I was hoping to get some optimism. I was hoping that Harald will be the yes, but as I said already. But the lesson that I take from this panel is not that it's impossible to reform, rather that it's very hard. And we'll face a lot of challenges. It will not be easy. We'll be facing a lot of obstacles. And there will be controversy, as we said in the previous panels, but we have to stay on the course. And I believe that we can do something great here. Thank you.